Hey, this is Tim with Arc Tactical. Today we're doing our very first podcast episode with Ian Edwards. Ian is an expert in human performance and travels the country training people, mainly in corrections world, but also in the corporate world, on how to level up their game when it comes to professionalism and human performance. Ian and I met many years ago when we were training for the Corrections Academy here in Washington State, and through that we developed a great partnership. Ian does his own independent company with Chisel and Stone, and occasionally will come and train one of our classes at Arc Tactical. Arc Tactical trains a variety of different schools where it comes to correctional emergency response, cell extraction, high-risk transports, de-escalation, instructor development, use of force in corrections. You name it, we probably teach it. And you can find that information on our website, arctac.net. That's arctac.net. We'd love to have you at one of our trainings. You can also see where we're going to be in the next couple of months training our schools there. With that being said, I really hope you enjoy our first podcast with Ian Edwards. All right, I'm sitting down here with Ian Edwards of Chisel and Stone. And Ian and I have been friends for a very long time. I had the pleasure of working together, teaching new corrections recruits and police recruits. And we just want to spend some time and kind of talk about what led him to be the man he is today and what he's doing now for the law enforcement and corrections profession. So Ian, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me into this.
Absolutely, man. This is going to be good. So for those of you, the small fraction of America that doesn't know who Ian Edwards is, why don't you go back and just kind of tell us what led you, out of high school, where did you go, military, some of your background.
Yeah, that's quite a big story to unpack as I age up there in years. I was born and raised in Renton, Washington, and after high school went to join the Air Force. That was a great catalyst for me. One of those kids in high school that just really didn't know what I was going to do. We had no direction. And the military seemed like an amazing opportunity. So joined the Air Force. I had a very honest recruiter. I went to him and I said, I want to be a cop in the Air Force. He said, no, you don't. You want something that'll really propel you. It's going to eat up all your time. You're going to be forced to do overtime. I said, I don't care. I want to do this. He goes, I can get you in as an electrician working on aircraft. It'll have sustainability after. I said, no, I want to do this thing. I had this urging in me to do the law enforcement field in the Air Force. Went and enlisted, became an Air Force cop, and did that for 4 years. One thing that's really notable, I always like to bring this up as part of my military piece, is I actually met my wife, who I'm still with today, in 2001 in Bosnia. We were both deployed to Bosnia at the same time. She was an Army girl, and I met her there, and we just stayed together. I'm sure this is going to come back up. A lot of my references are around family. I'm married to her, and we have 4 kids together, and almost everything that I have ever talked about or taught is relatable back to family dynamics. Tim, I know, as you are well aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, it was one of those things. We were looking at each other, a very short relationship that we started, and she was going to go back to North Carolina. I was going to go back to England. And we said, this is never going to work. This is absolutely never going to work. However, let's just see what happens. Let's ride this wave as long as, we can. The rest is, 24 years later, 23 years later, the rest is history. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That is cool. What do you think, and this is kind of diving into that tangent a little bit, but I think what's important, what do you think helped you guys stay together in the tumultuous times of, early 2000s in the military?
Great question. First of all, I think the biggest thing, if I could pinpoint, is not having the expectation of a perfect relationship. We kind of entered into the relationship with, this is going to be hard. It's going to test us, and it may not work. It may not work, but let's just see what happens. So I think when we experience tumultuous times, even up to today, right? When we experience tumultuous times, some of those ebbs and flows, it's a reminder that, oh, we're in one of those states right now, right?
Wow, that's such a direct correlation with some of the work that you're doing now is almost making it, okay to fail in a relationship, having able to acknowledge that it's tough. It's tough. Okay,
Yeah.
so you conquered in the Air Force, you met your wife. It's a
Yeah.
pretty successful stint, I think. What did you do after that?
Yeah. So I got out of the Air Force. I told myself I wanted to have a normal life as a 20, 22, 23-year old. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but my first thought is I love coffee. Let me go and apply to be a barista at Starbucks. They didn't like me. They wouldn't hire me. I don't know what it is. So I took a different route. I was working out at the time. I was in 24-hour fitness, and I thought, why don't I become a trainer? That my first job after the Air Force. I became a personal trainer. Did that for a few years, and really fell in love with bringing the absolute most out of people. You look at all these people that come in, they all have a desire, maybe don't quite know how to get to where they want to be. And it's this opportunity for you to introduce them to their hidden potential. So that for me was a major seed that was planted in my psyche that I have taken forward into the training world that, you and I occupy now.
That is so cool. I had no idea that you did that, and I can, backwards chaining who the man I know today is. That makes so much sense. That spark that kind of drives a lot of the things that we both do to build performance and to really see people be successful. That's great.
Yeah.
So you're a personal trainer, and how do you make the jump to corrections? Like, what does that look like?
So it found me. I usually like to say a lot of people find their careers, find their callings. Absolutely not true for me. I was really, really behind on bills at the time. I'm going to be completely honest with you here. I was struggling. I was working 2 part-time jobs. So I was working, 60, 70 hours a week with absolutely no overtime. And I got a call from my mom who says, hey, I just saw an advertisement. I think it was like on the side of a bus that the county jail was hiring. And I said, oh, I'll give it a shot. So I go and fill out an application, and, after the rigorous process, got hired by Snohomish County Jail, and the rest was history. I had no idea. Months into this hiring process, I'll never forget, I'm sitting there, I'm hired, we're sitting in the training room, and I thought, I still don't know what the job is. I have absolutely no idea what I'm signing up for. I've never actually been in to the facilities. So here I am, 4, 6 months into a process, and I'm at the tail end of the hiring piece and thinking, I have no idea what I'm getting into. But
Man, I think that there's people with a 20-year career that have no idea what the job is. It keeps changing so much. But that's awesome.
Yeah, you and I have talked to so many corrections classes where we have said, how many of you found that you just fell into corrections? And I see that to be true quite a bit.
Yeah, we always want to ask why corrections, right? And a lot of the answers that we get are a common one is, it's a stepping stone. And
Yep.
Though I honor that, I think what it does is it takes away some of the nobility that the field has to provide in and of itself. And a lot of people, hey, you could either do that work at a sawmill or you are joining the corrections force, and people find a lot of value out of that. So so cool. Now we're in corrections. You have no idea what you're doing. You're trying to make things work, and something led you to even go farther than that field, and that leads you to training. So tell me a little bit about that.
it all comes back to that seed of seeing the absolute best in people and wanting them to actualize that hidden potential. I don't know why that was such a strong force for me, but when I was working in the jail, I started as a field training officer, which is very one-on-one training with people. I almost can't explain the gratification of seeing other people's aha moments. It's almost as gratifying as having my own aha moments, where you see this light bulb and everything just makes sense all of a sudden. And you know that you have gotten through and they are better prepared than they were 10 minutes ago. So
Maybe better prepared than you were sitting at that conference table.
yes.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
Cool. So you started as an FTO and you quickly rose up in your agency from an FTO. And you, from what I know about you, and I know I'm kind of leading you a little bit, but you were desiring to do more with that, trying to build and improve upon yourself, which I think is a huge, huge impact that you've made, but also always seeking to improve your own status and improve your own knowledge-based skill set. That is what a sign of a true leader. You're doing FTO stuff and you make your way to the academy. Tell me how that went down.
So all divine timing. I mean, all the things really just fell into place for me. So at Snohomish County, I knew I wanted to train in the classroom. I wanted to connect with, bigger groups of people. And they put out an advertisement for report writing instructor. And I thought, there is nothing I would want to teach less than report writing. But it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to do what I loved. So I took it. I made it my own. I brought in techniques that I thought were going to really allow people to click with that particular topic and make it exciting. And at the time, so I became the primary report writing instructor, and the academy lost theirs. So they put out the statewide email, hey, we're looking for a report writing instructor to come out here and teach at the academy. So I came out to the academy that oversees, in Washington State, we had at the time a centralized academy that taught all of the city and county jails. So essentially I was going to have exposure to all the city and county jails in Washington State. And for me, that was a big jump. So I go out there and I make this mark, and they saw value in me. They saw me adding value to the program, and they began asking me to come out for other things as well. So it led to so many other opportunities. And at the time, the primary instructor was going to leave for a week, and they thought, who should we bring out to fill in at the academy while he's done? And so they asked me to come out there for the 1 week. I had no idea that was essentially a job interview to become his replacement. So I just went out there and said, let's get out here, make a difference, have some fun. And lo and behold, at the end of the week, they said, we want you to replace him. So I did that. 11, I went out and held that post as the COA instructor, the Corrections Officers Academy instructor, for the next 4 years. After that, and I don't know if that answers that, but after that, I went back to my agency, took a promotion, and then eventually became the training sergeant for the county jail.
It must have been some report writing class you were teaching.
Gotta make it fun. Yes.
That's right, man. I mean, if you can make that interesting, then that really speaks to your capabilities there. That's awesome. So your time as a TAC officer at the academy, what do you think your most impactful moments were there? What did that look like for you? What did you take out of it?
So many impactful moments, but I have one that I always talk about. So I've got a couple examples to give you, but one of them for me was almost a game-changing moment in who I was going to become as a trainer. Because as you remember, back in the 2011 time, it was still very militant. Recruits were run into a wall to brace, where they have to put their back up against the wall and stand at attention anytime an instructor walked by. And I loved that drill sergeant-esque like environment. I thought it was cool. I thought, it gave you a real sense of control or power, however you want to put it.
And you looked really cool in the Smokey Bear hat.
Yeah,
too.
you had the
really
cool
important.
hat.
Yeah.
It was good. But and I thought I was making a difference, but here's what happened is can't remember, it was about 2 years into my stint, and I feel like I was very good in that role. However, we had this big investigation of a rule violation in class. And it was the day before graduation, and you know how graduations at the academy are. We're doing everything last minute. We're finalizing papers. We're preparing for the big ceremony. There's almost no time to do anything. And I had this big investigation. So I'm doing all these interviews, and I'm pulling students in, and I'm asking them questions, and come to find out, this is something that happened week 1 of the academy. So yeah, so I'm asking, I'm bewildered that I'm doing it now. So I asked one of the students, I said, I have to ask, why am I just now finding out about this? Why not 3 weeks ago when I had more time? Selfishly, I want to know. And the recruit said back, "Sir, you are unapproachable."
Oh.
And those words were branded into my mind. Those words stung in a way that when you said what was the most impactful thing for you, it was one of those game-changing moments where I was struck with the realization that I had to occupy the space of an authoritative leader and also somebody that has a sense of safety around them, that people feel safe when they approach me.
You were teaching at people and not teaching with people.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy. And going back, I mean, because I want to touch on it in a bit. At the time, we had 4-week academies, right?
Yes.
And you were instrumental in fixing that here in Washington State, which is just an incredible, invaluable thing for our corrections officers. But having somebody sit with an investigative issue for that long, even 3 weeks, is really telling about the style of training that we were providing. And I say we because I was doing it too. And just that atmosphere that we were creating.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very impactful. So you're not that person anymore. I know that. You go back to your agency, you're a sergeant, you become the training sergeant. You did something there that I think is really important and worth mentioning. You redid your FTO program, the one that basically started you out as a trainer in the field. So tell me a little bit about what you did with the FTO program, and maybe more importantly, the mentor program that you built in correlation with that.
Yeah, the FTO, we had the standard San Jose model for FTO we were using at the time. And all of that stayed in place with the daily observation reports. We didn't tinker with that as much as we did hold the FTOs to a new standard of what it meant to truly honor that position. And at the time, it was among the FTOs, a lot of them were not comfortable with me as the FTO coordinator. And a lot of them said, we're done. There was quite a big exodus, but we put a job posting out for, and people that were interested in this. We held a very, very high bar, high standard interview process for our FTOs. And we got some of the absolute best in the agency to step forward and into that role. People that were hungry to do the same thing. That was my vision, which is to bring out the absolute best in people. And you think about the field of corrections, to bring the best out of somebody in one of the absolute worst environments. All right. So this is where you see that real trial by fire, that creation of the diamond from the coal, right? This is where the FTO's importance really shines through. So
it's one of the most pivotal role there. Sorry to cut you off, but being an FTO is truly the first line supervisor for many, many. In fact, everybody that is walking the floors these days in a correctional facility they had an FTO, and that relationship could either make them or break them. And it's so critical. And you talk about a mass exodus, and you know what? That's fine. We're happy to have the best people in those critical roles. So I think higher standards in those areas are really important.
Yeah. Well, and we've seen it in the words of Rumi, the great, philosopher and poet Rumi. He said, "Those who are here unfaithfully do incredible damage." And you think about some of the damage that is done by FTOs, who you have this new impressionable person that really doesn't just want to succeed. It's easy to say that all new recruits and applicants want to succeed and do the right thing. But I would say prioritized almost always above that is they want to fit in and be accepted. And we make it very, very hard to make that happen. And so for them to be accepted by an FTO, they're willing to do the bad things that an FTO is telling them to do. And we see this across the board. I guarantee anyone in any jail or prison in America knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the mentality. Well, now that you're back from the academy, let me show you how it really goes, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
I know that's what the policy says, but this is how we really do it.
Yeah.
And I've always been of the mind is, hey, if this is what we really do, let's just make that the policy. Like, why wouldn't we do that? But what it does is it creates a subculture within your facility, and that breaks down everything from employer-employee relationships to the FTO process, because you probably experienced as an FTO having another officer come in there and telling your student officer how to do. It breeds so many problems there.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things that I know that you did, just to circle back, that you did to kind of combat that is, as soon as student officers are off their field training program, you didn't just let them hit the ground running. You had a system in place that you designed to really help them succeed after their field training, because we all know that just because the time allotment has been completed, there's a lot of people that aren't their best officer yet. They're still training, they're still working on stuff. And I thought your idea and this concept is just super critical. So
Well, actually, it was spearheaded by one of my mentors, Lieutenant Simonson, at the time. He was the one to really bring that to fruition. I had a part in helping with the design of it and the implementation. I served as a mentor. But one other, just a small correction here, but it's so relevant, is that it started from the time they got hired. And what we would do is we would pair a new employee with a similar, a good fit. They would have to do personality profiles and backgrounds and all this questionnaire in order to find out more about them. And we would pair them with a mentor we thought would work for them. Now, if that wasn't a good fit, we could always switch them out with somebody who was maybe a better fit for them. But here is the beauty of the mentorship program. So you have essentially now two different roles that are working with your new employee. So you have somebody on FTO, and the FTO has to be in a certain place, an objective place of, this is what you're doing right, this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you need to do, to improve where you're at, this is how we're going to get you there. But simultaneously, you have the mentor checking in with them on a regular basis, going, how's FTO going? How are you doing? What are you struggling with? How's the adjustment at home going? So they took a much more objective approach to the new employee in their support. And to have those two working in tandem, I think is invaluable for somebody just coming into an organization.
yeah, I mean, imagine the support system there, because I know that when I first started in my agency, there was a lot of, are they going to make it type conversations with every new officer that went in there,
Yep.
And I feel like sometimes the FTO tries to take on a role of, I'm going to weed this person out, but that's not beneficial for the organization. It's certainly not beneficial for the person. And so if we have a system in place that really supports that seed that you have there is bringing out the best in this person, everybody's going to win. So what a great system to put in place. And I know folks that I talked to today who you did mentor completely value that experience that you provided them. So that, what a legacy. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
So you do that, then you go back to the academy as the assistant commander, the commander of corrections. Tell me a little bit about how that went down and your experiences there, because you probably, I'm going to just, spoiler alert, have one of the most influential stints as the assistant commander of corrections there in the history of that COA. So,
yeah. Well, full credit to the command staff, my commander, my boss at the time, Rick Bone, who basically gave me support in any direction that we needed to take it. So week one, when I went out there, he said something that I thought was hilarious. And I don't even know if you know this, Tim, but he said, make corrections sexy. Those were my marching orders. Make corrections
sounds like great.
And I said, honestly, if that's going to happen, we need certification, because right now our patrol brothers and sisters have certification, meaning if they do something unethical or illegal, they can lose certification and no longer be allowed to work as a certified peace officer in Washington State. I said, corrections doesn't have that. I could do something incredibly unethical in one jail, get fired, and go work at another jail. So we needed to be, it happened all the time. One of the other big issues that we saw is people who lost certification in the patrol world due to certain behaviors and then would go work in the jails because the jails weren't held to the same standards. So I said, that practice shows that we are not held to a high esteem. If you want to level corrections up, you have to start with correction certification. And you can't give a 4-week academy. Those two things just cannot happen. And for us to be able to say, oh yeah, we're professional, we're esteemed, we're noble, we should have pride. I can't carry that message when you give me a mere 20 days to train somebody.
Meanwhile, hairdressers are getting like 6 months or something like that to get their certification. That's crazy.
I think I remember at the time to become an employee at Jiffy Lube, it was a longer training process than for you to be able to manage the intense populations of a city or county jail. It made absolutely no sense to me. Those were my two big ticket items. Certification and the longer academy. I remember sitting down with our certification manager at the time, Tisha, and she was brilliant in her strategy, but she said it will take 5 years. And I said, 5 years? Who's got that kind of time? And she said, listen, bear with me. This is why it takes this long. We have to do this, then we have to wait for a session for them to make a decision. And then it has to get approved on the next one. So there were all these milestones that everything had to be hit just right. And we ended up.
Session, sorry to cut you off, but when you say session, you're not just talking about some like committee meeting. You're talking about Washington state legislation is what you're talking about.
Well, it ended up going to legislation, and that's actually what got us there quicker. But what I was really talking about was just the commission sessions that were at the time, the body that oversees the academy and the director of the academy. So they had a pivotal role in making the decisions to do this. They also had some champions that went to the legislature and really fought hard to make sure that this wasn't just a commission initiative, but it was a legislative one. And because of that, we were able to make this happen in just about the 4-year period.
That's incredible.
Big deal.
And
big deal.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too is you'll get some agency heads, and I do understand their perspective for a while, but they were not super in support of a 10-week academy. And though I understand staffing and I understand those things, truly trying to level up our officers in a way that not just prepares them, but also makes them the ones that are going to set the standard for their agencies through the next couple decades. that's going to reduce turnover in the long run. And
Yes.
that 10-week academy, which is what it turned out to be, I believe does that for sure. So though
Yeah.
I haven't seen the curriculum in a couple of years, but that's really where you and I linked up professionally. We've been buds for a long time, but when in 2021 you brought me on board to help work with the curriculum there, and we kind of did some really cool stuff. And then about a year after, I decided to leave the corrections organization in there and go to advanced training. So talk about some of the work you did there.
Yeah. So to do that, I would have to go back in time quite a bit, probably 7 years or so. Right at the end of my TAC officer time, my academy instructor time, I became just obsessed with human performance. It became an obsession with me. Looking at the science on how people operate at their absolute best, why some people can have a perfect game one day, and that same person with the same skills and even the same desire can show up the next day and be completely off. So I immersed myself into the world of optimal performance, what we would call flow. I started looking at studying meditation, mindfulness, breath work. I mean, all the things that I could possibly get my hands on. And that really led me to a whole new understanding of officer wellness. Because I was looking at the statistics of corrections officers and police officers and just blown away that we are so our attrition of the human body, essentially, the decay of the human body at such a rapid pace, being immersed in these environments, it hit me. It didn't sit well with me. And so I started introducing these concepts into our world, into anyone who would listen to me, essentially, which at the time, I know I sounded like a major hippie when I'm like, hey, let's talk about mindfulness and let's be in the present moment, those kind of conversations.
Well, now everybody's talking about it, and you were so ahead of the game because it works. And really, that leads to what you're doing now. But I love hearing the story with how you invested the time early on, and you really are a master of your craft when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was that person who would have pushed back. Like, what are you talking about? None of that is going to make a difference on how I show up. But then when I started researching the science behind it, the science is what really got me to understand how energy works in the body, to understand how hormones and neurochemicals show up and affect us in different ways, and how we actually can drive that vehicle. We are the one behind our physical machine, and we get to be the conscious creator of how we show up. That was big for me. And that really led me to start pulling from all these different disciplines, all these different fields, looking at a whole bunch of going all the way back to the ancient wisdom traditions to the science of today. So all that to say, to answer your question, I was in that assistant commander role in the basic training, and I was offered a position as a program manager in Washington State to oversee the officer wellness program that was commissioned to oversee the CISM project at the time, critical incident stress management. And what we did was brought in other elements. We were looking at other ways of doing critical incidents, how to bring peer support into it, and such.
And that's not just for corrections. And I think this is one of the really cool thing is that when you're really good at what you do, there's a threshold that you can kind of break out of the corrections world, and some cops will start to listen to you too, right? Because there is some otherization built into the profession, and we've come a long way here in Washington State. But once you started connecting with cops and showing things there, and how the same message that you're preaching to the COs translates to them, man, you started to hit the ground running. And that's really what was your focus in that advanced training area there. doing studies and stuff like that. So I don't know if you can explain some of the things you were trying to do, maybe some of the research that you were doing with that.
Yeah, so at the time, we wanted to see what people were doing, what was working, and what wasn't. And as you said, it was the entire responder community. And just a language thing, because I'm going to use this often. I refer to people in our field as responders. I don't like the term first responder because it is very exclusive to, maybe the first on scene. But I like to look at it in the idea that anyone who responds to what we have to deal with in society, right? All of the terrible things that we are faced and forced to deal with. And there's only a very small percentage of the people that show up as responders to the human condition, right? From dispatchers who are the first to take that call, all the way even to a coroner who's dealing with the same traumas on the tail end of it, right? So when we were looking at it, we were looking at the responder community as a whole and saying, what are people doing? What's working? What's not? After I call them a significant event, because it's not all significant events are critical in nature. They're not all big in nature. They might be very small to an onlooker, but could be very significant to the person who feels them. So we wanted to know how are we showing up in response to significant events, as well as what are we doing for the significant events that people experience that aren't on our watch, right? Because as you know, people are experiencing significant events after hours when they're away from the role, and that's where a lot of the damage occurs. But oftentimes we don't touch that. We think that's not my business. It's not my place to overstep. And that's where we truly fail the people who show up and serve for us on a regular basis. So I really wanted to ask those questions. What are you doing for your people while they're on your watch? What are you doing for them outside of your watch? What are the tools that you have? What's working and what's not? And the other big thing that we were trying to ascertain was, you have these things, but are people using them? So you could be the most innovative agency in the world and have all the cool equipment, all the best resources, and maybe 5% of your employees are actually accessing them. Is that a successful program?
No, it's not. So did you find when you were doing that, was it a lot of culture stuff that were keeping people from using those services? Did they not know about it? What did that look like?
Both. A lot of people didn't know about some of the programs that their agency had. And I love this because you would find out very quickly, because you send it out to an entire agency. Several people from a single organization would reply, all different answers about what the resources were. Some would say we have nothing. Other people from that same agency would say, we have the best program. We've got this and this and this. So there was absolutely a disconnect in a lot of those agencies.
And it's interesting because it leads us back to where you first started in corrections, is building culture at that line level, new officer, been there for 10 minutes, and really putting the time and investing in those people to go and set the culture for the next decade or two, right? So I think that's such important work. Did you ever find that there was a discrepancy between what law enforcement was seeing, or maybe recognizing what law enforcement was seeing, and what corrections was seeing?
Well, here's just one thing that really jumped out at me that broke my heart, was when we look at the criteria to meet PTSD, we could look at a patrol officer, and one in four patrol officers meet that criteria for PTSD. It means 1 out of every 4 cops that responds to your calls is backing you up, meets that criteria for PTSD. 1 in 3 COs do.
Really?
And at the time, when I started looking at the wellness stuff about a decade ago now, the survival of the the average life expectancy of a patrol officer at the time was 67. At the time, it was 57, a decade less for a CO.
Wow.
So I was looking at, and they're both terrible.
Yeah.
Both absolutely terrible.
57 isn't great.
Yeah, none of it is good. But here's what was really upsetting to me is that where there was money being spent, where there were resources being given, it was to the patrol side and almost none given to our corrections folks. And I think that's why we saw those statistics. I mean, anecdotally, I would say we're asking them to be fully immersed in an inmate population for up to 16 hours a day, an impoverished environment where they're producing adrenaline and cortisol in a hypervigilant state at a level that no human being is meant to withstand for any long period of time. We're asking them to do that day in and day out. And then we see these effects with absolutely no resources.
Yeah.
On the correction side of the house, the biggest resource that I saw was EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, that required thing that all employees had. But it wasn't being used at all. And here's what's worse is when I look back at one of my biggest regrets as a supervisor, and Tim, I don't know if you've experienced this too, I thought, wow, EAP really actually was a great program. But here's when I gave an EAP pamphlet to people when I was disciplining them. That was the only time I was handing out those pamphlets. Hey, if you need help during this process, here's an EAP pamphlet. That is absolutely terrible. I was actually solidifying a stigma that EAP is associated with negativity and bad stuff.
Yeah.
If I could unwind and do something better or different, it would be that.
I think when I used that as a resource, I only did it because we were told we were supposed to do it. If you were to ask me what it was really about, I don't know that I could tell you.
Yeah.
Looking back at what that really consisted of is, man, they got all kinds of resources, everything from mental health to financial resources to like all kinds of stuff. And it's incredibly undervalued and definitely underused. So that's really interesting. So you do some great work there. You're still working in the movement to improve others, now focusing on a lot of their wellness stuff. I want to say September or August of 2021, you made a huge jump, a bold move, as I like to call it, to leave the profession entirely, kind of.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
A similar story to many that you hear these days. I found myself in a position where I was teaching a lot online. So I still do a ton of teaching. I teach almost every leadership program that Washington State's academy has to offer. Newly promoted folks in Washington State. So first level supervision, pre-supervisor, 21st century police leadership. I was an instructor for all of those. I was doing a lot of contract work for other companies as well. And I thought, if ever there was a time to chase my dream and be just a contract employee, being out and eventually getting to a place where I could launch my own stuff, my own curriculum, and have total have the reins and control over what I was delivering, that's the dream. And I remember asking myself, if I wasn't afraid, what would I do? If I wasn't being ruled by fear, what would I do? And it wasn't even a question. It was jump and see what happens. What's the worst thing, And then there was a period of time where I had to sit there and say, am I going to let fear rule my life? Am I going to let fear rule my life? And I wasn't comfortable with that. So I did the thing. I quit my job with the state, went to a 1099 self-employed status, created my own company, and my family and I in Washington State at the time picked up and moved to San Antonio. And
Just like
chasing the
everybody else.
sunshine, yeah, like everyone else, chasing the sunshine, chasing that healthy vitamin D, that dose of happiness that you get just from sitting out on the porch this morning before meeting with you and drinking coffee and having a conversation with my wife. I wouldn't have done that in Washington per se. I mean, some people can. I just know I wasn't doing that. So
Don't jinx us. It's been really, really nice the last couple of days, but it's been 10 months of gray before that. So I hear you. I hear you.
yes.
So we kind of skipped over it, but during the part where you're developing those skills and becoming immersed in a lot of the wellness modalities, you've kind of made a name for yourself in that world because you're now, in my opinion, the go-to guy, not just in law enforcement, but in a lot of other corporate areas. You do stuff with Georgetown University. You do stuff with a couple other corporate companies to bring that wellness message and develop their people as well. So now you're not just focused on law enforcement, though it is a huge focus of what you're doing because I'm very blessed. I still get to teach with you in several of our contracts around the country. So now that you're that guy, what are you mentioned that you're developing your own programs and stuff. What are some of the things that you have created as far as a program?
Yeah, so some of the faves, and before I even start, I like to frame most of what I do around the soft skills. Now, people hate that term. People hate that term. I absolutely love it because of you. So I just wanted to highlight that. You actually reframed this for me quite a while ago. Because your world, a lot of it has to do with the tactics. What is the mechanism to get the job done? Your physical fighting, your physical control, your cell extractions, all the things that you use your physical machine for to do the work. My world is on the soft skills. How do we run the hard skills? So the way you said it so eloquently that I've stolen and have used many times since is it's like a computer or any piece of technology. The hardware is there. All the pieces are in place, but if the software is not running, then the hardware is nothing. It's a paperweight essentially. The software behind it is what keeps it going and keeps it running efficiently. And also, it is the software that constantly needs to be checked and upgraded and updated and virus checked and all the things. So that's my world of the soft skills. When we talk about leadership, communication, emotional intelligence, what are our ethics and our values? What are our biases? What are the things below the surface that are causing us physically to show up in a certain way? That's the world that I'm in now. So there's a lot of different programs we have in place now that allow people to take active control over their own software, right?
That
their
is
own
so
soft
cool.
skills.
So needed. And I think I don't like this term, but there's a bunch of life hacks that you have developed, breathing techniques, again, going back to your human performance stuff that really do streamline it for people that maybe aren't that into that type of stuff. I know that I've been very lucky that a lot of the stuff that you have put out there into the universe, I've kind of stolen and then looked at and developed my own routines as well. And that has certainly helped me build my performance now as an entrepreneur and now running our tactics companies. We're so lucky to have you as a resource and as a friend, man. I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing. What's next for Ian? What are you doing now?
Well, as you said, I'm still doing a lot of work for a lot of great places, great companies around the nation. However, this year has been the biggest launch of Chisel and Stone. And just to give you an idea why Chisel and Stone. Chisel and Stone was from that story told about Michelangelo standing in front of, the statue David, and the Pope approaches and says, "What is the secret to your genius? What is the secret behind this genius?" And he says, "It's simple. I just remove everything that is not David. And I thought, what an eloquent way to look at training. I'm not giving people anything. Everyone has everything in them already that is complete mastery locked away. We just need to remove the things that maybe people are holding on to that are no longer serving the best version of themselves. We've all picked things up. We came to this planet perfect.
Yeah.
And then the world messes us up along the way. It tells us a whole bunch of stories. It beats that perfection out of us until we get to a place where we're in dis-ease, right? That's where, we get the word disease from. And so I started looking at, I'm a philosophy guy, big into philosophy. Socrates knew this. Socrates knew exactly what he was talking about. He said, everyone has all human knowledge within them. If you ask enough questions, you can get them to the truth. And that's why he used his Socratic method. That's where we get the Socratic method from. It's just asking question after question after question until truth emerges. And so the idea behind Chisel and Stone is, how do we peel back the layers in mastery, in the pursuit of mastery of anyone who experiences our training? With that became the unique place of recognizing that every student is completely different. Just like on the mat, all your students are different. You have to meet them where they're at.
That's right.
So what I would say is very unique about the training that, and I know you've been in class with me quite a bit, is how you and I operate. It's a lot of questions. We're asking a ton of questions. We're just getting people to bring out what's already inside of them. This is where the true spirit and essence of Chisel and Stone is born, is when people are teaching the class themselves. And all of this great stuff is coming out. Because intuitively, we all know the answers, and we just need to be reminded, right? Or we need to articulate it.
Sometimes I feel like people will just go through the motions in life and not really know why they're doing what they're doing. And so one of the things that we try to say when we teach a class is, if you're doing something and you don't know the answer to the question why, well, then you're wrong. You could be doing something completely right. But if you don't know why you're doing that thing, you need to think a lot more about why and what you're doing. And that's true with the hard skills and the soft skills, right? So I really, really appreciate that element. The Socratic method works for sure when we're facilitating. And that's one of the cool things that I like. We say teaching because it's part of the common vernacular, but we're really not. We're facilitating, right? We're facilitating discussions. We're getting people to answers that we believe make sense. And I think that's such a huge part of the transformational experiences that you provide in your classes.
Awesome. Yeah, and to answer your question, earlier you brought it up too. We have the FTO developed. It's an advanced masterclass for FTOs that are already FTO practitioners. Maybe they're already trained on the FTO model or the PTO model. We have a masterclass to add on to that, which is coaching techniques. It's how to ask those questions rather than just constantly give answers. You're actually creating a higher level of maturity when you bring somebody from being spoon-fed to now you're asking the right questions and getting them to understand not only that the answer was in there, but what principles behind those answers there are, so that connections are made at a deeper level. So we have the resiliency class. I love that you were able to bring me out to teach the resilience and growth class to one of your conferences not too long ago. That was just an absolute blast. We have also creating a level up culture is a shorter 4-hour class that gets agencies or groups of people to earn a level of trust with one another, that they're not afraid to level each other up, that give constant feedback. Similarly to the way you and I operate, we're constantly saying, I don't think this landed well, or I saw some blank faces. From the sidelines, maybe it would have been interpreted different if you had said this. When you give me that kind of feedback, what do? I immediately take that feedback and implement it. Imagine a culture where instead of living through fear or distrust, we create initially a sense of safety and then teach people, give people the skills to be able to have level up conversations so frequently that mastery, that perfection is on the horizon, and we're constantly moving in that direction. It's difficult because, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think so many people in any type of career, whether it be law enforcement or working at the grocery store, they're skipping that initial part of creating safety. And if you don't feel safe, then being humble you can't do those two things. So there's a lot of people with humility that come out there. They're naturally feeling safe because they're comfortable with who they are. Maybe they got something else going on, spiritually that helps them get there. But if you're a Joe Schmo and you don't feel safe to fail, going back to what we initially started with, if you don't feel safe to fail, then you're not going to be able to take that material, that new input, the level up, and then use that to develop yourself more.
Yeah. Well, it's such a big process too, because in a short amount of time, as you have seen in classes that we have done, you can create trust in some groups that would never trust each other outside of that. But what we do is we start with a series of very small trust building type, whether it's conversations, activities, and we slowly move them to higher levels of not only trust, but discomfort, learning that they can be both uncomfortable and reach a higher level of trust simultaneously. And that's what's essential for a level up culture. A lot of times we would rather avoid the discomfort, right? So we step back, or we're okay giving, feedback to people. I'll tell them what's what, but we destroy trust in the process.
Right.
And that's where we traditionally get it all wrong. So how do you create the culture that brings those two things in tandem together, where you are not only building trust, but building feedback into the fabric of the culture? So that's a big one. My absolute favorite class that we've done is the de-escalation class. And this is de-escalation at any level. This should be in every organization in America, because there's always a place where people are in a stressed place and we have to be able to bring them back to a level of safety. So
we can do that in the world of corrections. Talk about a stressed place, then we can do that anywhere. We could do that at the airlines. We could do that at the grocery store. And that's exactly what that does, is it brings that level of safety in, while also learning how to recognize that somebody else isn't feeling safe, right? And kind of making those links. So,
yep. Yeah. And it's been such an honor to be part of those groups who have really embraced the de-escalation class, and through the train the trainer class that you and I put on, to see people truly become vulnerable and find how strong they can be through that process. And it's been really just a great thing to see. Biggest impact. You see those life-changing moments happen in there.
Super impactful in the classes. But one of the things that came out of that, and I know this is sounding like a commercial right now, but I think it's really important to emphasize how important this class is. We came back and taught a second class to a very similar group, with different people from an organization. And we had learned in that class, they liked what we were doing so much that they made it a policy. So they redid their culture at their agency to bring in a lot of the tools that you are bringing to these folks. It's just super impactful, and you know that they are spreading that, and it's only going to get better with that message there.
Yeah.
So you're developing more classes. What type of stuff are you focusing in? You mentioned an FTO coaching class. What else is on the horizon? Anything else?
The one other course that has been a favorite by organizations, a lot of great feedback coming through, has been combating manipulation. And this is I would say very specific to the corrections field. The other ones are pretty transferable across the responder community. But manipulation, combating manipulation speaks to a CO being completely immersed. There's no reprieve. And you're in there with inmate populations who have nothing but not only time to whittle away at your psyche, but they've got the skills to do it. And so what we typically do is throw our COs or our correction staff in with an inmate population, and we don't even train them. They might get a 2-hour or a 4-hour crash course on manipulation and how to avoid it at the academy, but they don't actually get to learn about themselves. So what we do in the combating manipulation course is you're taking self-assessments. You're looking at your own Achilles heels. Essentially, you're looking at your own vulnerabilities. This is where I'm strong, but this is where I'm susceptible to potential manipulation. I have to be more on guard in this area. So the whole first part of the class is self-awareness. It's around dissecting yourself, and then you learn the tools that you would be susceptible to with those vulnerabilities and how to combat those in very specific ways.
Super important. And we find that COs get manipulated quite a bit, not just bringing in contraband and stuff like that, but all other kind of ethical violations as well. All the way up to being self-sabotaging with their coworkers and with their employers. So really, really important. What would you say, and this will probably be my last question to you, but I think it's a really important one. What would you say your purpose is right now?
Unleash the mastery, unleash the masterpiece within all who experience chisel and stone.
I love it.
I also do it, and you know this, I do a lot of coaching work with folks as well, where I sit down and do a 1-hour, 2-hour session with folks. And everything is about just me asking questions, me whittling away at the stone. That is my passion. That is my purpose. That's truly why I believe I am here. And honestly, the responder community deserves it. We've been neglected. We're asked to do the absolute worst thing, and we are given very little resources. I usually, just to kind of end it out here, I liken it to the Olympics. You know, you have people in the Olympics that are gathered, you know, every couple of years from around the globe to come together, the best of the absolute best. They're masters of their craft. Some of them, since they were like toddlers, have been doing the thing, and they know it inside and out. They're the best practitioners of that thing, and even the slightest mistake could be a massive disaster for them. So they have to be on their game at all times. Now, we look to them and say they're perfection. They're the ideal of what they do. And so we expect mastery from them. But here's what I would say. Take any Olympian prior to the Olympic Games, 2 weeks prior to the Olympic Games, subject them to sleep deprivation, 16-hour days, malnutrition, dehydration, trauma after trauma after trauma, completely immersed in an impoverished environment, being insulted, having their values tested for just a 2-week period. And then what level of mastery would we expect to see from that individual during the Olympics? Would anybody be surprised if they didn't meet the mark? Absolutely not. They would say, well, have you seen what they've been subjected to? And then you have people in the responder community that they haven't been trained since birth, since a toddler. They haven't been brought up in that practice. They have been given very little training. They've never been given the opportunity to actually master the training, but we always hold them to the expectation of mastery, even though some of them have been going on for 10, 20 years of all of those elements that I talked about.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely imperative. I love training all walks of life. You know, as you said, I do corporate work. I work with other fields as well, but my love is the responder community, because these are people who are putting themselves at risk on a regular basis. They know that they are taking years off their life just for donning the uniform. Even if nothing happens today on shift, you are literally taking time off of your clock by donning that uniform. And so for that, it's just a way to give back to those who to wear the uniform and answer the call.
Oh, it's such an important message, man. And thank you so much for what you do. I know we got some good stuff coming up working with Arc Tactical. We're going back to Tennessee in July. You're doing some work here in Kitsap County in Washington. And then in October, it looks like we're going to Iowa, which is going to be awesome. But where can people find you outside of the ArcTac website?
Easiest way to get a hold of me is through arctac.net, just through you and your website. You and I do a lot of work together, and so that's going to be the easiest way. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Ian C. Edwards. That is going to be my name on LinkedIn. I love connecting people through that social media platform as well. So all
Awesome.
that's available.
And I'm going to have all that stuff in the show notes there. Thank you so much, man, for doing this. I really appreciate it, and being the inaugural ArcTac podcast guest. You're forever indebted. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me, man. Let's do it again.
Sounds good.